Sports. It's time for Football at 4. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, joins us with a look at the NFL, Eagles, and more. Johnny Mac, what's going on, man?
A little stunned. Josh told me he stayed up late to watch Korean baseball.
Yeah, we have
I said, why didn't you watch the replay?
Right, we got the replay on right now, so you could have watched this game here live. Great stuff. So I want to get your take on something that Hunter and I were just going back and forth on pretty angrily last hour. We had a good conversation. Mike Tannenbaum this morning on Get Up had something interesting to say, and he essentially said, look, Wentz is one concussion away from being serious, and that more teams now have like a whole concussion category, that if you fall in that category, that they have to be even more cautious. And I'm kind of wondering if that's the way now front offices almost have to think, is that if you're not thinking about that your quarterback is one hit away from being in the concussion protocol and then that being a constant problem, are we going to see more teams place a higher value on adding a backup quarterback in a earlier round?
Yeah, I think I've talked about this quite a bit. That's permeated the NFL's thinking as a whole, and I think things have shifted. For instance, almost people cavalierly say certain so-and-so will be there for the next 10 years. I don't think NFL teams think that way anymore. It's almost become college where you kind of know you have to reload every 3 years or so. In a best-case scenario. And part of that is the injury situation. And when we talk about the safety issue, people are very hypocritical about that. It really comes down to head injuries and concussions. But in the case of Carson Wentz, if you want to nail it down, I don't see any evidence that typically when you start talking about players being a hit away, it's players that have had multiple concussions and seem more susceptible to it. I don't see that as a heightened awareness for Carson just yet. Now, the curveball to all of it is there have been players who have walked away from the game early for their own particular reasons. Chris Borland, probably the first, most high profile, coming off his rookie season, which was a really good season. And then you've seen it a few times since then. Not a tidal wave, certainly, but it's enough to where it creeps into your thinking. So I think from that standpoint, I think everybody has started to think that way, and it's certainly not just the Eagles or just Carson Wentz or anything of that nature.
Yeah, it seems that a lot of people, obviously have this problem that they took a backup quarterback in the second round. And it's like, first off, the Eagles are viewing him as more than just a backup quarterback, number one. And number two is that I think a lot of teams are, I don't know if you want to say the Eagles were a year ahead of the curve here, but I think a lot of teams are going to start going down this road where let's get a affordable backup. Because, John, you're starting to see teams have to put so much money into that backup quarterback position.
Well, a couple things. I think, the Eagles might give you a gold star. They're going to like what you just said there. They want to hear they're ahead of the curve. I don't know if that's the case or that's their thinking or this is a trend. I think people have made a big deal out of it for the simple reason it hasn't been done in so long, 51 years, I think, if you go back. So this is not typical behavior in the NFL. Now, maybe it should be, and maybe you can roll out a host of reasons why it should be. But it is strange, and it's strange not from the fact you see it all the time at other positions. It's strange because of the position. And I do think you have to take into account that the quarterback position is different. Quarterback position is the face of the franchise when you have a good one. And, the theory in the NFL is you got to put everything behind your quarterback and do everything possible to maximize his window of potentially winning. And I think the people that have had an issue have brought up, and probably rightfully so, look, you already have your star quarterback. Why not help your star quarterback? And you can talk about packages, and you can talk about Taysom Hill, and you can talk about maybe Jalen Hurts' ability to be on the field at the same time for a host of plays, but is that going to be more impactful than a Miles Sanders type who, it's not too hard to go 53 to 53 because Miles was the 53rd selection the year before. It's now a big part of that offense, big part of that team. If you hit on a player at a different position, similar caliber this time around, that's probably more helpful to Carson Wentz. So I think that is the most legitimate criticism.
The reason I don't like the financial argument with this is because if you hit on a secondary piece or another player in the second round, you save that money that you would have to go out and spend someone in that position that you can use on the backup quarterback, the veteran backup quarterback type of player.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Hunter. That is largely nonsense. It usually is when NFL teams start talking about salary cap and this, because we've seen it. I mean, that's the strength of Howie Roseman. When this team was in salary cap hell, and I put that in quotations, didn't matter. They got everybody they were able to get. You restructure deals, you move money around. You just saw Andy Dalton sign for essentially $3 million as a veteran backup quarterback with 130 starts. Now, if he has to play, he'll make more. But if he has to play, the Cowboys aren't going to be concerned about him making more. They'll gladly hand over the extra money. I agree with you from that standpoint. Very little to do with getting a cost-effective backup. I mean, Josh McCown made a little over $2 million last year. Yes, at some point they paid Nick a lot of money to be a backup quarterback, but that is the rare.
And Chase Daniel, by the way, Chase made about $10 million.
They overpaid Chase Daniel, but that's poor evaluation. That's a mistake. That's not. You can go out and get some value at that particular position, especially. Now that teams are getting smarter and smarter, you see fewer and fewer poor contracts. Occasionally you get a bad contract, but again, as I always talk about with poor contracts, and people always point to it and say, this is a bad contract. People say it about Alshon Jeffrey now, and how he did by reworking the deal. It's not a poor contract if you're right on the evaluation. It's when you're wrong on the evaluation that it becomes a poor contract.
Right. Like, I look at all these quarterbacks every single year, the Andy Daltons, like there's always these veteran quarterbacks that you can go out and grab and you can somewhat cycle them through. And that's the way that I would approach this because, Gil mentioned this, Matt Moore, for example, and he did well with the Kansas City Chiefs. If I mentioned Matt Moore as a quarterback, we would have said, oh, my God, this bum, there's no way. And he's able to do the job. So, like, these veteran quarterbacks that you can find on the market every single year, they will be capable for a 3-4 game window if need be. That's at least how I see it.
No, yeah, I'm in your camp. And I've said, and I said it yesterday on the show, I mean, if you're going to rate the backups in this division, I think the Eagles are last right now. I really do. And part of that is experience, not major part of it. Now, maybe 2-3 years down the line, we're having a different conversation. But again, we're talking about the backup quarterback. We're not talking about the starting quarterback. The goal is to not play the backup quarterback. So when you talk about insurance policies, the hope is you don't have to play them. And if you do have to play them, well, then the best case scenario you just saw not very long ago in 2017. Get hot at the right time, win a couple games, and hopefully you do the improbable. That is what a backup quarterback is supposed to do. It's not supposed to be two of the best 10 players at the position because that is irrelevant. First of all, last week I talked about that with Mike. It's an impossibility. It's not going to exist, number one. And number two, even if it did exist on the practice field, what the heck does it matter? You can only play one. it's a dumb goal to have.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, and I said to Hunter, that if they drafted a backup quarterback, and let's say, first off, we don't even know that Hurts is going to be the backup quarterback. We assume that he's going to be, but he's got to beat out.
I would bet on Nate Sudfeld right now.
Right, he's got to beat out Sudfeld, who has been here longer. But I said if you drafted a guy and his role was to hold the clipboard and wear a hat, then yeah, you probably overvalued the backup quarterback. But I think a lot of this has to do with, John, that they have to have more in the playbook for him than just standing on the sideline. And I think the disconnect that a guy like Hunter would have and someone like me would be he's not valuing the percentage of snaps because it's too low. And I would say sometimes those are the most important snaps of the game because the other team can't account for that guy. And that guy sometimes separates two equal teams.
Well, yeah, in a micro sense, it could always be a play here and a play there, and if somebody makes it, and I go back to Taysom Hill again in the playoffs last year when he was tremendous. I mean, if he didn't play the way he played, the Saints aren't even in that game. Now they ended up losing it anyway, but he kept him in that game. In a micro sense. In a macro sense, though, I would rather have the Hall of Fame quarterback on the field. And I've always said that about the Saints. I'm not taking Drew Brees off the field. Now, maybe that starts to differ a little bit as he gets older and older and older. But if I have Carson Wentz, I'm not taking him off the field. It's as simple as that. I don't care. Yeah, on a certain play, sure. Maybe Jalen Hurts does something spectacular. Maybe it even wins you a game.
Yeah.
But I think over the larger sample size, I think it's going to do more harm than good to take the great quarterback off the field. So that's kind of my statement there. Yeah, I mean,
but what if you're not not taking him off the field? He's on in addition to.
Well, then you're taking off. If he's playing receiver, you're taking off one of your top three receivers. Hopefully there's improvement there. So if we say, who's it going to be? Deshaun Jackson, Jalen Reagor, JJ, is Alshon going to be there? Who knows? Are you taking Dallas Goedert off the field? Are you not playing two tight ends? Are you taking a Miles Sanders off the field? Who are you taking off the field? I would argue they're better at their position than Jalen Hurts would be. So it would be a similar tack. Yeah, always you can have a spectacular play by a great athlete, but I think over the larger sample size, you want the better player who can handle that position better. I just think that makes the most sense to me. But we go full circle to the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think this pick has anything to do with that. I think this pick has to do with durability, and that's the concern. And that has more to do with than the concussion. It has to do with 3 years of not being able to finish the season. That, I think, is legitimate, the Eagles' perspective, but they don't want to go out there and say, we can't trust the face of the franchise to be on the field. They don't want to say that. You have all these convoluted messages in addition to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point is, they're sitting in the draft room saying, look, this guy's been hurt. And what was the message, John? Can he run? Is he healthy? And does he love to play? And the answer to the Wentz thing at the end, we haven't read so much into that, but that was one of their messages. Is he healthy? And the answer for Wentz has been no. So you look back at their draft board, can he run? Is he healthy? And does he love to play? Well, Wentz doesn't check the number 2 box, so therefore on draft day, someone gets drafted because they don't see him to be healthy.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I've said there is more to it, and part of it is the evolution of the game I've talked about. Part of it is what you talked about, Mike, and having on the field for certain packages. I'm not saying none of it has to do with that, but the vast majority, and I put, if you're going to put percentages on, which admittedly are worthless, but just to explain it to the fans as plainly as possible. If you're going to put percentages on it, 80 to 85% is just an insurance policy and durability.
John, this is another interesting number for me when it comes to Hurts, Hunter too. He led college football, for whatever this is worth. He led college football, including running backs, in red zone rushing touchdowns. He had 17 touchdowns running in the end zone. And you talk about the Eagles, who scored 10 points in the playoffs. They struggled to find ways to score in the red zone and all sorts of stuff. To have that extra, guy in the red zone, that's where I think it's another situation that people don't think outside the box on, is they struggled so much in that spot, and to have a guy who has really excelled in that area.
Well, Carson is statistically good in the red zone, though.
Yeah, a couple things. The Eagles were third in the NFL in red zone offense last year. So that's number one. Number two, I talk about this a lot, and, people focus on production rather than evaluation. Yeah, Jalen was great at it in college. Oh, by the way, at Oklahoma and Alabama, which, no offense, he was a great player. I'm not trying to downplay him. He was a really good player, but it's Oklahoma and Alabama. They tend to have success against everybody in the red zone, no matter who's playing. It's just a different level of college football. And you have to kind of phase it to, what did Alabama do with him? What did they do with Tua? What did Oklahoma do with, Baker Mayfield back in the day? What did they do with Jalen? They're always successful. It's just a matter of how much. But, yeah, one of the things with the Eagles, and this stunned me offensively, people talking about them and talking about the struggles and constantly harping on the struggles. The reason for the struggles were pretty obvious in the fact that they couldn't stretch the field. They lost that explosive element. Situational football, red zone football specifically, third down offense specifically, they were top 5 in both, which told me two things. One, Doug is really good as a play caller, which I've been very consistent with, even when people criticize. And Carson's really good in situational football. And I'm not, it goes back to what I said before. I'm not taking him off the field. If he's healthy, I'm not taking him off the field. And no offense to Jalen Hurts, certainly not for Jalen Hurts.
I want to go back to the can he stay healthy question that was asked by Howie Roseman. What would the message be like? And I'm all about the message right now. I feel like they are talking in circles. It's one of the most crazy things I've ever seen. It's really brutal, in my opinion. But what would it look like if he went out and got Howie Roseman, Corey Clement, which he did, and Jason Peters? Now you're bringing back these two guys, and the question, one of the biggest questions, can they stay healthy? Yet here they go. They're going to bring back some players who cannot.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, the mixed messaging, and you could add. Mike brought up the 3 bullet points, and how he said you could bring up Marquise Goodwin as well, because he can run. He might love to play. I have no idea, but can't stay healthy. So there have been, these mixed messages, and to be fair, and I've said it pretty consistently, and I've brought up how he said we got to get younger. We got to turn the page. That's a theme. It doesn't mean every roster move has to be in that vein, because you do need some veteran players. And certainly this year, where we're having this crazy off season, which essentially you're not having an off season, it's probably more important than ever to have some veteran players who understand the system and understand how to be professionals and all that kind of stuff. So it is just a theme. It doesn't mean everything has to line up. And it's impossible to make everything line up. But you're right about the mixed messaging. That's fair to point out. I've pointed it out. A lot of people have pointed out. And on certain issues, but some of them are easily explainable and some aren't. Jason Peters, to be honest, is easily explainable. If he's back, it's because Jeffrey Lurie wants him back. The Carson Wentz and his durability and, staying healthy, all that stuff, you can't say that about your starting quarterback. So they can't go out and say, hey, Carson hasn't been able to finish 3 seasons. We can say it. And we can point it out. They can't. that's just not how you do business, and you don't want to undercut the starting quarterback. But the old adage in the NFL is always, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And if you watch what they do and then cobble it together with reporting, some off-the-record stuff we get, you can kind of get a clearer picture of what's going on. And to me, again, depending on what situation you're looking at, they're all pretty clear, but they're all so different issues. As I mentioned, Jeffrey Lurie's involved in some. Carson's durability is involved with Jalen Hurts, and so on and so on. There's usually a pretty clear explanation.
He's John McMullen, Football at 4 at JF McMullen. Of course, give him a follow on Twitter, Football at 4. Every day right here we talk NFL and football. Eagles as this Jalen Hurts. They were talking about it all morning today, and obviously off Wentz talking yesterday. And, Wentz to me, he couldn't win. I wasn't going to say, yes, I'm pissed that they drafted a guy in the second round. Like, I mean, what did you want the guy to say? Obviously. But I said in the past, he's kind of got that all shucksy personality that he might not even care. He might be like, no, I like Jalen. He's a great person, and it's great to have him in the locker room. With Wentz, that wouldn't surprise me either.
No, he cares. But that's a perfect example. That's a 180 from I just said about Howie. Howie's got to have to handle things a certain way. Carson has to handle things a certain way. And he's been around long enough, and he's got media relations people who get him ready for these situations. He understands the questions are going to be asked. He understands why they have to be asked. And he understands how to answer them. He's not happy. Nobody's happy. As I said, Aaron Rodgers isn't happy. More explainable situation because of his age. You go back to, as I mentioned, Brett Favre before Aaron Rodgers, go back to John Elway with Tommy Maddox. There's been these situations in the past where people, it's a little strange because of Carson's age and because he's still in the prime of his career. But again, that's where the durability comes in. So that's the fly in the ointment from that typical perspective. But nobody's ever happy when there's a premium pick. As I said, Greg Ward's not happy that Jalen Reagor's here. That's just the way it is, and that's across the NFL, and that's every player when a high-profile draft pick is brought in at their particular position. I mean, it's just human nature. They're not happy, and Carson's not happy. But he's going to be a professional about it.
Yeah. I think if somebody can handle it, it's probably him.
Question about that.
If somebody can handle it, it's probably him.
Yeah, he's kind of sensitive, to be honest. I don't know.
Well, for God's sakes, he had a backup quarterback win the Super Bowl.
Well, exactly, and that was, part of this that was also strange because, I think I've mentioned this before on the show as well. At times, the Eagles treat him with kid gloves, and they try to protect him at all costs, and then they do another 180. We just talked about mixed messaging. And now they say, okay, we're going to draft a quarterback, deal with it. It's a little bit strange.
Well, you know what, John, from what was the movie? Oh, man, I had it and I blanked. When Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn, he's all grown up and he's all grown up.
Swingers,
baby. So they're all grown up now. He's 27. He's a man.
Well, yeah, he should be able to deal with it. But, I mean, part of it is that unique situation. And you have this weird, passionate fan base. Not everybody, but a little bit. It's insane that anyone, but you know this better than anyone, Mike, there are people in this town who still believe Nick Foles is a better quarterback than Carson Wentz. Still believe that.
Yeah.
It's insane, but they still believe that.
Well, we'll get a chance to find out this year.
To deal with it, and well, you've already found that out. But it's like
that's true. This
is a guy who, took this team to 11-2, and I've told this story in the past, and I love this story because, Jason Peters has this different personality, and he's this larger than life figure, and he's a guy that everyone in that locker room, it's almost like a mob situation. They not only respect him, but they fear him. And I remember he was injured during the Super Bowl year as well. I remember a reporter going up to him at training camp, and it's not one of the beat guys who are there all the time. And they said to him, how much do you want a Super Bowl ring? And how much do you want a Super Bowl ring? And Jason gave him that 1,000-yard death stare and said, I already got one.
Right.
And Carson Wentz, I said, from that day, I said, that's what Carson Wentz should say. He's already got one. He was the MVP. He was going to be the MVP of that league. He was 11-2. He put the Eagles in the situation where they were going to have the number one seed in the playoffs. He was a huge, huge part of that Super Bowl winning team. He doesn't feel that way, and I don't know why. And he should feel that way, but that's a personal thing, and that he hasn't been able to get over it. I think it hinders him, to be honest.
All right, Johnny Mac's back tomorrow with another football at 4 at JF McMullen, and of course right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.
All right, there you go. Good conversation, good talk.